Welcome back, guests. Good to see you, Geoff and Mike.
Good to see you, Kate.
Jeez. I know.
She's back.
I'm like
tumultuous couple of weeks.
I'm the hotel pokeroo. Like, is she real? Is she real? It's good to see all of you. It's good to see all of you. Yeah. We're going to call this a holiday edition of Hotel Pacifico. It's BC's premier destination for political analysis and commentary. And like many hotels in our beautiful province, Hotel Pacifico is bursting at the seams with all the elbows up Canadians who are canceling their US vacations in favor of destinations like ours here in BC. To support our own vacation plans, we're recording this episode a few days early. So guess we're going to sneak away next week for a little break. There's no strategy suite this time. We're going to do a deep dive into Trump's trade war and how it's hitting the BC economy and how those changes are likely to play out in BC politics. Our guest today is uniquely qualified to answer those questions. We have former Premier Glen, who spent 12 years as President and Chief Operating Officer at the Pattison Group, one of the province's largest private corporations with interests in every part of the provincial economy. Since Glen left Pattison in 2023, he has been appointed Chair of BC Hydro. He's also CEO of Overstory Media Group and a board member of the Portland Hotel Society. All in all, good spots to observe our economy and how it's playing out in the lives of voters. So welcome back to Hotel Pacifico, Glen.
Thanks, Kate. Appreciate it. Actually, I did 22 years with the Jim Pattison Group, but 12 years as
man,
president.
sorry. I stole a decade of your life. How rude. I'm so sorry.
More
importantly, I think it was 12 years as president and chief operating officer, but
okay.
10 years before that running.
More importantly, your third trip to the Hotel Pacifico. So there you go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is my third trip. Yeah. Friend of the show, as they call me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's unfortunately no merch available for you, but we'll work on that.
It's in the works. All right, Glen, I don't want to assume our listeners actually know Pattison Group. I mean, I think many might know it for the car dealerships, I'm going to assume. But can you walk us through, there are a lot of different business interests within the Pattison Group, and you're deeply connected in different parts of the economy. Can you talk to us through that?
Sure. I mean, obviously groceries is big, right? Save On Foods, Nesters, Urban Fare, Nature's, they have quite a bit of grocery business. It's about I think $6 or $7 billion a year in sales, about 25% market share in British Columbia, a little less than that in Western Canada, but still quite large. So grocery is a big part of the business. They own the largest fishing company in Canada. It's about $1 billion in sales, mostly in Alaska now, unfortunately. They own obviously billboards, a big market share of billboards in Canada. They own a magazine distribution company. They own a packaging company with 19 factories in the United States and Canada. They own everything wine. They own what else we got? Leasing business, car leasing business. We got the car business. We got the electric sign company, which is a lot of the leasing business. So they're the largest private company in Canada.
Canfor.
Yeah, Canfor, West Shore Terminals. They own a lot. It's a big company. They buy a company every 3 weeks.
You told me one time,
Ocean Brands tuna.
You said one time to me that the unifying philosophy was that Jimmy Pattison looked for things that people need every day. So they need to move, they need to eat, they need to, and so it went. So this is a very deeply rooted company in the economy for that reason.
Yes. They don't. The only thing we really kind of avoided was technology, partly because Jimmy would say he didn't understand it very well. And having said that, all the companies now, use a great deal of technology in their businesses just as a matter of course. But we don't invest in intellectual property, other than I guess Ripley's. We own Guinness World Records and Ripley's, believe it or not. And so there's some intellectual property there, but we don't, but not so much, technology-driven companies, more meat and potatoes, if you can put it that way. So we are pretty rooted, and of course, in British Columbia, our home, we're very large, so we do have a good sense of. You can see, 49 radio stations, 3 television stations, and so radio, TV, cars, food, fishing, all of those industries in British Columbia, and woods, of course, forestry, of course, means that we really get a real good snapshot of what's going on in British Columbia.
Given that you were diving in and diving out of businesses, I'm sure, I'm just imagining that one day you were dealing with everything wine, and the next day you're dealing with canned foreign, and the next day you're
Yeah.
dealing with something else.
Yes.
What are the unifying questions you would have when you go in and ask how it's going? Like,
That's a
what are the
really good
common
question, Mike. In
principles?
fact, the Jim Pattison Group, is kind of similar to government in some ways, right?
Yeah.
In the sense that, one minute you're dealing with healthcare, the next minute you're dealing with the resource industry challenges.
Yeah.
But there are unified, business is kind of simpler than government. Are you making money? Are you not? Can you
Hmm.
cut costs? Can you raise revenue? Are you being efficient in your operations? So each company, you kind of establish each different metrics, right? So the return on invested capital will be higher in,
Hmm.
say, Ripley's Believe It or Not than it would be, say, in uh, um, today's radio business, which is a tough business, right? So you might
Hmm.
have different rates of return, but essentially that's how or the Bid Pattison Group tends to look at everything is what is the return on invested capital? Are we getting a return, essentially? And so it's not that hard. When you're looking at each individual businesses, most of those presidents of those companies reported to me, you really are looking at how are you doing compared to last year? What's the anomalies? What's happening to the
Hmm.
margin? What's happening to profit and loss, and what's happening to the size of the staff? And one of the things about business that's kind of interesting, and I think people who aren't in business don't understand, is that really you're driving costs out every day. I mean, that's really your job, is to reduce the amount of cost pressure on the businesses. And you can't, it's not a, it's not a given that this is your cost. How are we going to make money? Every day of your life, you're looking at how can we reduce
Hmm.
the burden on that company? How can we reduce costs? And occasionally, of course, how can we raise revenue? But mostly you're looking at always driving down, becoming more productive and more efficient as you move forward.
Is that a principle that can be applied to government?
I think it can. It's obviously government's harder, right? Because government has multiple objectives, not just profit and loss or not just the balance sheet.
Hmm.
It has to look, and you can't cut um, healthcare spending, or you shouldn't cut healthcare spending, I would argue, I guess, or even education and these other areas. It's not as easy. But you can look for efficiencies. And I do think that's one of the challenges in particularly modern government is the sheer size of it and the inability to drive the kind of efficiencies you'd like to see. And it's regardless of who's in power, politics, these are big challenges. And in companies, and the Jim Pattison Group, I think it's partly Jimmy's genius was that, each company has to stand on its own, right? Like there's no cross subsidies in the Jim Pattison Group.
Hmm.
Just to give you an example, we own the largest electric sign company in Canada, but we may or may not do the Save on Food signs
Hmm.
Hmm.
because we're not competitive or we didn't win the bid, or that we have had a big magazine business in Canada, distribution business, very large with hundreds of trucks, and the trucks we didn't lease from Jim Pattison Lease because they didn't win the bid. So you can be, what Jimmy would try to do is have each company have to stand on its own and not rely on the Jim Pattison Group or cross-subsidize with other companies. And I think in government, that would be an interesting challenge,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
breaking down your sector by sector and making them try to be efficient in their own right. I mean, previous governments have done program reviews, including the federal Liberal government and others. The successful ones, I think, have not had the ministries themselves do the analysis. They've taken deputies from other ministries and said, okay, you look at this one, and then taken the ministries from that one and you look at that one, and try to, in other words, try to disassociate the operating side from the efficiency side, if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
what happens in government and what happens in the private sector too, is if you're in the health ministry, you're living and breathing and dying, if you will, on the health file. And it's a
Yeah.
huge file. And every day you're looking at, oh, if we had more money here, we could save more lives. If we had, how come, and you're looking at all of these challenges. So it's hard to step back from that and say, okay,
Hmm.
well, how are we going to be more efficient? Because you're busy running a day-to-day function. So sometimes it's better to take some people from inside, other parts of government and say, okay, you look at
Hmm.
this from a separate lens. You're the mining deputy minister or something. You look at healthcare and say, how can we find efficiencies? And I think there's been some success in that in the past. It's not easy, to cut spending. And I think one of the challenges of governments, again, all governments, is to say, well, let's just cut 5% or 10% across the
Yeah.
board, as opposed to doing the really, really hard work of what you might call program reviews, like what
Yeah.
not do. One of the
Yeah.
other areas in government, if you don't mind me carrying on, is in business, and that I learned anyway, is it's really hard, if not impossible, to make people work harder. In other words,
Mhm.
you can't say to people, "Oh, we need to save money. You have to work harder."
Hmm.
You really have to look at what you're doing. Like, stop doing stuff.
Hmm.
Yep.
Like, literally stop it. We're not doing that anymore. And now you're freed up your time to be more productive in certain areas. I think that's a lesson that's really hard for people to get their head on around. I just give you one small example. We don't, at the Jim Patterson Group, we never really use outside consultants, but at one point we were losing a lot of money in magazine distribution. I was running that company. And so we did bring a consultant in and said, hey, long story. And they came back with an infuriating recommendation, which was they said, stop signing checks. So you think about a company that's, say, roughly $1 billion in revenue.
Yep.
And we had, I don't know, 50 or 60 accountants, and they were signing checks every week, um, to suppliers and various things.
Mm.
And the accountants all said, well, we really like signing these checks because it forces us to really analyze and understand what's going on, et cetera. And the consultant said, you're spending $300,000 a year signing checks. Stop signing them. And once a year do an audit or something and review them, electronically, and stop having people physically signing checks. So we did it, right? It was kind of annoying to me because it was such a silly recommendation, but it literally saved the company $300,000 a year.
Mm.
And it was a really good reminder
Mm.
that that's a really good way to look at business and look at government.
Mm.
Like, if you look at the sort of regulatory creep that we've seen, again, this is not really unique to an NDP government or a Liberal government. There has been regulatory creep in all these
Yeah.
areas. And some of it, obviously, each step is justified
Hmm.
for some real reason they're trying to solve. But the cumulative effect has a big impact on a whole bunch of things, including time and delivery time.
Mhm.
And I think it would be challenging, but interesting to go and say, you know what, we really need to look at these, not again to sort of make them more efficient. Say, what can we stop doing? What can we actually stop measuring and stop doing?
Mhm.
Because that's the only way I think fundamentally you can really shorten time frames and speed things up is by really looking at the things that you don't need to do anymore.
Guess, let's call this one a culmination. The federal government has just announced their decision on the item we've been talking about for months and months and months. The feds upheld the CRTC's framework that allows wholesale fiber access for internet services. Cue the celebratory hand clapping and confetti emojis. I added that little techno outburst because it's how our presenting sponsor TELUS must be feeling. You listeners know they supported the CRTC's decision right from the beginning. They're grateful for the government's leadership here and for the advocacy and support of the Western provincial governments too, because it reinforces Canada's commitment to real competition, consumer choice, innovation, and, so relevant in these times, nation-building investment. It also sends a strong signal to Canadian businesses and investors that our regulatory system is transparent and stable, providing the certainty they need to invest and grow. Back to TELUS to wind this up. They are passionate about building national infrastructure and technology because it benefits consumers and increases the productivity and innovation of our private and public sectors. And they'll continue to invest in helping address these challenges of our time: digital inequality, the responsible development of AI, the transformation of our healthcare system, environmental sustainability, and food safety and security for all Canadians. TELUS also just unveiled a new brand promise. 4 words you can read pretty much anywhere you see their logo. We're always building Canada. Powerful stuff, particularly now, and they mean it.
Yeah,
Uh,
sorry,
yeah,
long soliloquy.
no,
Sorry.
that was a good one, and I had about three questions that came up along the way. I'll try and pick one, and we'll go from there. But like, so just one thing, like I had this a strong reaction when you were talking about how the Pattison Group is run and how like each business has to stand up on its own. And just to bring it back to where you were kind of doing the comparison to government, right? Like it's like, well, the ferry example comes exactly to mind. Like if you ran it like the Pattison, if you ran government like the Pattison Group, that decision to let those ferries be built in China is quite simple. And I think where you were going is saying and if the analogy falls apart. And I think what's interesting, and I want you to talk about this because, so if you're in the Pattison Group and you're saying, okay, well, our shipbuilding arm is not viable, ergo, we can sell it, we can get rid of it, right? We can't do that in government. All the pieces you're trying to have work together, you have to have all these ministries, you have to do all these things. And so these questions become so much more knotted. And I'll relate it to your other point in terms of, what can we sort of abandon and say don't do, and what can we take off our plates? And anytime you stop doing something, you activate a bunch of people to go,
Yep.
I'm angry. So in this moment, are there things that you see that the government should be doing to say, places where the Overton window maybe has switched, where maybe they have permission they didn't have, courtesy Trump, to stop doing anything, to take away some things?
Yeah, it depends how, radical you want to become, right? But let me use BC Hydro as I'm the chair of BC Hydro, and this is, this is not government policy, and I guess I could lose my appointment for this. I don't care. But if think about it, we didn't, Utilities Commission didn't exist until I think was it 1980 or something. There was no utilities.
That's a Mike McDonald question. You don't have that at your fingertips,
I
Mike?
don't know.
Oh, you're
No,
clearly
it didn't.
clearly
It
in
did,
vacation mode.
if you think about the evolution, okay, the government nationalized some of the power industry, created BC Hydro as a government entity, and set about as a crown corporation to develop two rivers at the same time that the private sector wouldn't do. All the dams on the Columbia
Mhm.
River and the Peace River, all done by government directive, right? And then when they stopped building dams at some point, they had to change it from a building company to an operating company. And when they switched to an operating company, they cut a lot of costs, they cut a lot of engineers, they got rid of a lot of people, and then they brought in regulation. Okay. So the regulation, the Utilities Commission regulates, and everybody instantly go, oh, that's a good idea. Let's have a third party review this monopoly, make sure they don't. But think about it. So we're regulating BC Hydro as if it was Imperial Oil, right? The
Mhm.
same, like it's or Cenovus or natural gas. In other words, we created a regulatory agency to regulate a government-owned corporation. Like, why? Like, why are we doing that to ourselves? It's 14,000 pages of documents to file before
Yeah.
the Utilities Commission. It's millions of dollars of BC Hydro staff to file those reports. The Utilities Commission then pays interveners to funds interveners like big industry, like senior citizens to come in and kick the crap out of BC
Wouldn't
Hydro.
BC Hydro actually be funding those interveners?
Yeah, the
If it-
Utilities
yeah.
Commission funds interveners, and
Yeah.
the Utilities Commission is funded by basically the proponent, which is BC
Yeah.
Hydro in this case.
Yeah.
And they beat the crap out of them, say you shouldn't be doing a 3% increase. It should be 2.75% or something, or you shouldn't be doing this or that. And after a year later, you might get a decision from the Utilities Commission that might say yes, might say no, might slap on the wrist, might not. Well, we've created this huge regulatory environment around BC Hydro's regulations. Well, why won't we just get rid of all that and you get rid of if you don't like BC Hydro how they're operating, then defeat the government that
Well,
own it.
governments of all stripes just decide what the rates are going to be
Well,
anyways.
that's what
Yeah,
happened, Mike. That's
yeah.
partly my
Yeah.
point. The governments of all stripes end up intervening at the Utilities Commission to overrule them or
Yeah.
set boundaries, etc. And I'm not out to get the Utilities Commission. Actually, Mark Jackard's doing a great job, and he's I think done a really good job in the last while streamlining the regulatory environment. And people want the right to come in and attack BC Hydro or criticize them. So I get that, but just think about what we've done as a society. We keep setting these layers up, right?
Mhm.
So now we've got the government owned corporation. We've got a whole Utilities Commission apparatus, expensive. We've got a whole regulatory regime inside BC Hydro dealing with that. We've got a North American regulatory regime for utilities to try to deal with issue. So if a bird strikes a power line in British Columbia, we have to report it, and we report it internationally. We set up environmental assessment review of BC Hydro, or a review of, let's say, we do a review of BC Hydro. We do an environmental review that can be critiqued by the Utilities Commission, or we do a review for First Nations. We do negotiations with First Nations that can be reviewed by the Utilities Commission for its validity. Again, I'm not arguing to get rid of the Utilities Commission. I'm just using this as an illustration of the depth of the costs and the depths of regulation. Does it lead to better decisions? Maybe it does. Actually, I'm not even going to argue that. I'm just saying that. But what's the cost of that, right? And this is where you get the kind of Trump kind of reaction, right? Where people at some point go, wait a minute, why are we spending all this time and money and effort on this kind of stuff? Let's just get on with doing something, right? So
Well,
instead of taking, 8 years to build something, it used to take 4.
well, case in point, maybe, is the forest industry, where we've just seen the Prime Minister produce a $1.1 billion package to sort of protect the forest sector from the latest attacks by the Trump administration through softwood lumber tariffs and so on. I mean,
Yeah.
to your point, we've been spending 20 years winning battles at various tribunals about our forest management practices and facing staggering tariffs anyway, even before Trump. What's the way out of this impasse on forestry? And is 1.1 billion just a sort of a goodbye note to the forest industry from the federal government, or is it going to provide some
Well,
relief?
first of all, I should say I'm happy to see the federal government doing anything to support the forest industry because they've done nothing for a long, long time. So it's certainly a positive development for those communities. It's not really all that significant, but it's helpful, I think, in a broad sense. So I don't want to be negative about that. I want to tell another story. I apologize. I have lots of stories, but when I was premier, people don't, I'm sure, forgot this, but I changed the forest regime at one point to help the industry because there was a downturn, and people said, "Oh, you can't do that because we'll get countervailed. We have an agreement with the United States, and at that time it was a quota system. We weren't allowed to export more in the United States." So I led a delegation of business people and government people down to Washington, D.C. to meet with them to talk about the changes we wanted to make to forest policy. And the industry is quite nervous about it. And we'd go and they talk about free trade and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, we ended up meeting with Max Baucus. Max Baucus, he's called Mad Max. He was a Democrat from Montana, and he was the head of the anti-Canada, lumber coalition or whatever. So I went in to meet with Mad Max or Max Baucus in his room. Actually, he's kind of a cool senator. He was in a bucking Broncos that he was on and stuff like that in the corner. He kicked out all the business people, and it was just him and I. And I'll never forget this. He said, Premier, he said, I don't give a shit about free trade. I only care about jobs in Montana. He said, I assume you're the same. You only care about jobs in British Columbia, to which I agreed. He said, why do the Canadian business people come down here and talk to us about free trade? Don't they understand we do not give a shit about free trade? All we care about is jobs in the United States. Now, this is long before Trump.
Yeah.
And this is the mentality of the
Yeah,
Americans
he's a
now.
Democrat.
And a Democrat, yeah.
Yeah. By the way, we got a really good deal. And I think our industry was shocked because him and I got along well. And I said, well, we have a quota. We can't exceed the quota without a huge fine. And so why do you care if I cut taxes or cut stumpage or cut royalties on lumber, as long as there's a quota system where you don't go above that? If you want to raise the price or the tax above the quota, go ahead. I don't care. If you want to do that, go ahead. But we want to do what's good for our industry within the system that we have. And he said, yeah, that makes sense to me. No problem. Go ahead. So we cut the minimum stumpage in British Columbia. We actually we did this forest renewal, so we funded it out of when prices were high, they pay more. When prices were low, they pay less. We did the same thing in natural gas, by the way. And so those kinds of changes, you can't make, but you got to deal with Americans as Americans, and don't be sort of these Canadians are kind of this naive free traders that think that they can preach, free trade philosophy to craven American politicians that are
Nah,
looking.
yeah.
Doesn't
No, I can,
work, right?
I can say this as a Windsor born and bred. Like it, I grew up assuming we were like, we were one and the same and we all know we're together.
Yeah.
And I feel like the Americans are like, we didn't know you were there.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
But what
Exactly.
about today's
But
industry, though? I mean,
but the
with
industry today is the challenge
yeah,
is this is and Jeff's very correct here. Like, you have to put it in context, I think, for Canadians. I don't think they probably really understand this, and it's a little different today. I'm a bit out of date, so but Canada provides 30% of the lumber consumed in the United States. Think about that. It's huge economy just south of us. 30% of every piece of lumber that they use comes from Canada. And British Columbia is half of Canada's lumber production. So British Columbia, our little province, provides 15% of all the lumber used in the United States. It's a massive, massive market for Canada. And so people say, oh, we should just use more wood in Canada. Well, I mean, it's mind-blowing how much wood we sell into the United States. You could not possibly consume that lumber in Canada, even if everything was
mm,
made out of wood in Canada.
mm,
So that's the challenge that we have as a country and as a province is that we really do send a lot of lumber to the United States, and that's very hard to replace because shipping it all around the world, we can do that, and we do that, and should do more of that. But it's very hard to replace that big volume in the United States. Now, I think Canada has shrunk quite a bit. So instead of 30%, I'm guessing we're probably down around 25% or maybe less. And BC shrunk even more than the rest of Canada. So we may be, down to
do they have the
10%.
capacity to replace that in the U.S. though?
They do have some capacity. In the United States, they have some capacity because the United States has southern yellow pine, which is a different product. It's a heavier product. It's not as strong as the old growth Canadian lumber. It's not as light as the Canadian lumber. So it's not as completely substitutable. And in the United States, they have developed that market. And there's still, in Canada, we call it sustainable harvesting. In the United States, they have a term called growth versus drain. So how much is it growing, the tree, and how much is it draining by cutting and harvesting? And they have had until recently a surplus of growth versus drain. So Canada's
Mm,
been a declining harvest because we've been harvesting more than we think is sustainable. Some of that's government directed, but we're harvesting less now because we thought we were over harvesting. In the US, they have room to actually expand production and still do
mm,
because the growth of that southern yellow pine is quite quick and it's lots of disaggregated private forests in the United States that still have some room to grow. That's been rapidly taking up with an expansion of the market. This is a case where sectoral tariffs have worked for the United States. The big tariffs on Canada have driven Canadian companies to invest in the United States and expand their capacity in the United States. And as pretty well almost everybody has in Canada. And so it's kind of worked to drive the growth in the United States. And it isn't completely substitutable, but in a pinch, you can substitute it. If you think about a guy building a house or a woman building a house, it's Canadian lumber, like pine, is quite light and strong, and American southern yellow pine is really heavy, and so it's just harder to work with. But you can certainly do it. And there's usually a premium paid for Canadian. I'm not sure what it is today, but there's usually a premium on the Canadian lumber because it is kind of better quality lumber and very similar to what you see in northern Europe. So as they pound away at the BC lumber business, it had a couple of effects. It's driven investment in the U.S. It has as well raised prices to American consumers. There's no doubt because we're such a big supplier of lumber, you can't put a tariff on Canadian lumber and not affect price. So ironically, a few months ago, I was reading that the Canadian BC lumber producers are actually making money even with the tariffs because they just pass it on to consumers. And there's a bit of market power there. We have some market power in Canada based on just the size of their consumption of the American consumption. So there's a bit of room there, but it's still very tough on our industry. Using more wood in Canada makes sense. Mass timber, which Geoff Meggs was there when John Horgan and others started driving that. You're seeing that really happening here, and that's great for the Canadian. business. There is opportunities in Asia and other places that we've kind of let slide. There's some opportunities in Japan, which Canadian lumber is highly prized. So there are some diversity opportunities. India, we don't sell much to India. There's some areas to do that. So doing more with less and diversifying our markets all makes sense. Ultimately, though, it's very hard to replace the U.S. You can't be standalone.
Let's talk about innovation, because it's more than just a buzzword. At its core, innovation means turning new ideas into real-world value for customers, communities, and the planet. So what does that look like in the energy world? That's where our sponsor FortisBC comes in. With over 2,700 employees living and working across British Columbia, FortisBC is putting real dollars into real projects right here at home. Their Clean Growth Innovation Fund just got the green light to keep going through 2027 with $5.5 million a year dedicated to advancing new innovative energy projects. Since 2020, over $20 million has been invested into 65 projects, from turning farm waste into renewable natural gas to cutting-edge hydrogen research at Simon Fraser University. But here's the best part. This fund isn't just for big organizations. Whether you're a university researcher, a startup in its infancy, or part of a nonprofit with a bold idea, you can apply. If your project can help reduce emissions and build a better future for BC, FortisBC wants to hear from you. Learn more at fortisbc.com/cleangrowthfund. Sometimes the most exciting innovation is happening right in our own backyard, even right here at Hotel Pacifico. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
A wild diversion maybe, but it's sort of relevant. So we've been through this battle for 20 years.
Yeah.
And we've tried to develop other markets. That's the Prime Minister and the Premier saying we need to do now. And we're going to be the economic engine that pulls us really out of this battle and so forth. That's Premier Eby's line. Is there any world in which we don't continue to trade with China? I mean, this has been one dimension of the ferry controversy that I find hard to manage, because we really need some big markets we can sell our stuff to, I think.
Well, the problem, Geoff, with that thinking is, I think we don't, the government needs to be strategic about these questions. If you said, hey, if you buy $1 billion worth of Canadian lumber every year, we'll build our ships there, that would be a smart strategy. I could get behind that.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of saying, if you look at economic development for governments, and I think this is particularly true today, one of the big levers, maybe one of the most important lever they have, is procurement. Like that is how you drive import substitution. The federal government's proposal to increase spending on the military, and I'm sure they're going to do this because every government in the world does this. They're not going to just go buy military equipment. They're going to force people to invest in Canada to take advantage of that. They're going to have offset agreements. They're going to go to manufacturers of whatever weapon system, and they're going to say, we'll give you the contract if you invest in British Columbia or Canada, or et cetera. It's particularly true if the auto industry is in decline. They're going to try hard to switch those to sort of military procurement opportunities, and that's why the ferry system is so disappointing that the government went to China, because that's one of the biggest expenses the provincial government can make. And they obviously made no attempt to see if they could get some jobs in Canada associated with that. And I'm not close enough to it, so maybe they had good reason for it. But it's just disappointing, because I think these are the levers you have, and particularly when there's no more free trade. In the past, governments kind of self-constrained themselves because we signed treaties around the world for free trade. Americans never did really self-constrain themselves, but we did. And so we're always looking at, we got to go with the lowest bid, no matter where they're from, because we have these trade agreements. Well, that fundamental has changed dramatically. That is the world we're in now, is to say, okay, we can't rely on the trade agreements we have. We have to find a way to drive development into Canada. That means using government's purchasing power in every possible way to try to see if we can leverage more jobs in Canada. And that's what the federal government's talking about, and they haven't done anything yet, but I applaud the thought process. And I would say if I'm in government today, that would be really, really, really important. Every piece of machinery, everything the government sort of induces behavior should be looking at import substitution. And again, we can't always do it, and we shouldn't always do it, and it doesn't make economic sense to do everything. But and maybe and shipbuilding is a debate you can have, but we should always be looking at it hard. And it's going to be interesting, Geoff. You know this, you're closer than I am, but I mean the bureaucracy is so steeped in deeply enmeshed in the free trade environment and
I
the low
agree.
bid environment and the
Yeah,
inability to take risks in government. So they look at everything. It's got to be, how are we going to bid this? What's the and how's the price going to be? And to say to a senior bureaucrat, throw all that out. We want this to be Canadian. They look at it, their head explodes trying to think about how they could do that.
But in
In
BC Ferry's case, I mean,
mm,
given that they're quote hands off from government, um, they their only incentive is really to bring something in at the lowest number to sustain their debt
right.
servicing and
So
and,
Mike,
and
why
keep fares
why
down.
if okay, then they should be private. Like I don't I
Yeah.
mean, there's no reason for that to be a crown. If the Crown Corporation is not going to have a bias towards British Columbia, then it's
Mhm.
ridiculous that it's owned by the government. They should sell it
Mhm.
and just subsidize it like they do other products. Because it's silly to say the whole purpose of a Crown Corporation, the whole purpose is to drive a pro-Canadian or pro-British Columbia. In my
Well, I
view,
guess where
otherwise
I'm
it's
going with this, it's not like the government didn't know they're going out to buy ferries, right?
right.
So
And they proved
both
it, I'm sure.
both the
Yeah.
BC and federal government, I mean, the
Yes,
federal government was involved through the Canada Infrastructure Bank.
absolutely.
So, BC Ferries could have been told that, hey,
Yeah.
we've got to leverage this. That if
I
we're going
think
to
the
do
thing,
this in China, then we've got to get something back,
yeah,
right?
I think they could have. I think, Mike, to be fair to the governments and governments generally, they have, until recently, until Trump, there has been a reluctance to intervene and try
Intervene,
to
yeah.
do what I just said, right? It's been a
Yeah.
reliance on trying to get the best price. We trade with China, let's be fair, let's just get the lowest price possible. That's been the philosophy of governments for quite a while, since. And so the change has been dramatic, right, in the last little while. And I think governments haven't, sometimes the government has not caught up to the change in attitude that people have towards being pro-Canadian, right?
Mm.
Like when I was around, if they built the ferries in Quebec, I'd be disappointed.
Mm,
Mm.
mm,
Today,
yeah.
I'd be delighted.
You were
It's
going to
like,
close the
great.
inside passage. How did that work out?
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't.
Yeah,
mm, mhm.
yeah. I mean,
But
these,
listen,
yeah, the issues are different today, right? And I think, I mean, let's face it, Pierre Poilievre didn't adjust the strategy to deal with the zeitgeist that was happening in Canada. Jagmeet Singh certainly didn't. They both ran campaigns as if they were like 5 years ago or 3 years ago.
Mm.
And the only person who actually grasped the moment was the current prime minister, who realized
Mm.
that Canadians realized something was going on here and we better deal with it. And
Mm.
that's the only issue that really galvanized the electorate. And I think it's taken a while. And I still, even today, by the way, I don't think that being British Columbia is interesting. Like, I don't know if people have grasped yet how significant, how challenging we could be in for here, right? I think
Mhm,
there's more of an acuteness awareness in Windsor, Kate,
mhm,
because that industry is clearly jeopardized by
mhm.
by Trump, and it's more awareness in Hamilton, where there's a steel mill. But in British Columbia, where we've been pounded for years on forestry, the place is still humming along here. It's not really in a crisis yet. We're
Yeah.
not, yes, not yet, but we're not feeling. I don't know if
Yeah.
people feel quite the same as they do in Toronto towards
Yeah.
the towards the issue. I mean, there's a heightened awareness, but I don't know if they quite grasp it, right?
It's very different. It is very different. I'm curious what you think the politics of it is going to be, because I just like you said it. The current prime minister, I think, grabbed the moment really well, and I'd say Premier David Eby also did. They both
Yes,
did a really
I agree.
effective elbows up, right? And that's the vibe. And to your point about how the discussions go, talking to Americans who are like, I only care about American jobs. It's not a really viable strategy long term. We're in for a lot of pain. So if we're kind of on a 2-year track for another federal election, another provincial election,
Mhm.
I'll let you pick which one you want to talk about,
Sure.
right? Like what's the politics of that for them? What does David
Well,
Eby do?
it's a
Yeah.
really good. That's obviously a good question for both of them. I think they're doing the right things, both of them, in some respects. But it's talk is cheap, right? Like, if the federal government is saying, they want to do defense spending as a procurement, try to create jobs in Canada. Just to use that example, they better see some action.
Mm,
Like you
Mm.
better, and this is the
mhm,
challenge again. This is the challenge of modern government. Is again, in my view, everywhere is the gap between statement and action is too long
mhm.
for the current Instagram generation, right? In other words, people want results. And so that's why it's so important. And I applaud the provincial government and certainly my minister, Adrian Dix, really for driving, say, we're not going to have an environmental assessment of wind generated electricity. Saves 2 years, 2 years on the process by just streamlining that. And similarly, if we're gonna do, other big projects that the federal government's talking about, if throw the old way, particularly for liberals, I'd say, is throwing money at the problem and hoping that solves it is no longer acceptable. The state has to have the capacity to really drive change. That means a sense of urgency, a sense of momentum to actually make a difference. And it's very, very hard. And that's going to test Carney came from the private sector. It's a lot easier the last 20 odd years working in the Jim Pattison group to affect change because the sense of urgency is there. And this big bureaucracy we have has to change the mindset to understand the threat to the country and the requirement to actually get some things done. And it's going to be really interesting to see. I think I'm hoping, I'm really hoping and optimistic things will happen, but I'm nervous it won't, right? I mean, let's use hundreds of examples. When I was the minister of responsible for capital spending in British Columbia, we built the first HOV lane from the Lionsgate Bridge to the Second Narrows Bridge in 18 months. The commuter rail system that still exists today was built in 18 months. They're building this, there's a similar distance of HOV lane today out in the Fraser Valley, and it's taking 8 years and $1.2 billion, and it's not built yet. Now, is that because people are lazy? Of course not. Is that because don't want it built faster? Of course not. It's just all of the complexity and rules and changes that have made it very difficult to build fast in Canada. And so, if the prime minister, I don't support this, but if he wants to build an oil pipeline across the northern British Columbia, I'd say good luck. I mean, if he wants to do that, is he going to do
Why don't
that
you
in the
support it?
time? Why? Because I just think, first of all, here's why I don't support it. The current pipeline that they built through Vancouver is not full. Secondly, it's $4 billion to increase the capacity of the current pipeline down to Vancouver. Do that. We
Mhm.
have a pipeline, do that, spend the $4 billion, not chump change, and increase the capacity of that pipeline. Then we can consider an oil pipeline across the north. And but think of how challenging it would be to build it across the north and the cost of that. It would be, I don't know what the number is, but you know how much it costs to twin the one down to Vancouver, to do it
Mhm.
across the tough territory in the north and negotiate with all those
Mhm.
First Nations across the way and do it in a fashion which is good politically, Kate. Like you're going to run an election in 2 years, you'd be lucky to be have anything done in 2 years other than talk. And so I think Canadians are impatient. There's this and this is again the sort of Trump effect, right? In some respects, we have this instant, we have this attention economy, right? We have this instant gratification kind of view of people want stuff done. We have a prime minister now making big promises about bold initiatives. Well, that's not going to get you reelected unless there's tangible evidence that the bold predictions are happening, This is why, and now this is really, really parochial of me, but we're trying to build a North Coast transmission line, which is probably going to be 5 or 6 billion. But we got it all it's kind of permitted almost. We've got agreement with most of the First Nations. We could actually do that, and like quickly, and we plan to. And the federal government should be jumping on board for that and then take it farther north so we can really open up some mining opportunities and maybe even go to the Yukon. You want to do that? We can do that. An oil pipeline across northern British Columbia is a pipe dream in my view, no pun intended. Like it's just a really challenging long-term project.
Yeah.
Again, let's say I'm not against it. It's still a long-term project. You're not going to see come to fruition for a long time. Whereas
Yeah.
there's some quick wins that we could get by really moving fast. And by the way, I feel the same about procurement. Like you could probably have some quick wins on defense procurement, by talking to industry in Ontario particularly and replacing some of those lost auto jobs. Probably quick. Like if I were advising the federal government, the prime minister or the provincial government, you'd want to get some quick wins to show Canadians that there's a different mentality in terms of speed, in terms of Canada first, in terms of using government procurement to generate jobs and not just talk. And that, will be a challenge, I think.
Is there a
I feel like
strategy? Good.
I was going to say that I feel like this might be an audition tape for Glen's federal appointment.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't think so.
If the
I
prime
don't think so.
minister calls, will you answer?
Well, it depends what it
You
is, I
seem,
guess. But
I mean, he seems to be, well,
but I think
he,
I think
he
look at I
Depends what
think
it
that
seems
is.
like you're on the same wavelength in some
well,
respects. So,
we are in some respects. I just don't have confidence that they're going to do it, right?
yeah.
I just don't. I mean that. I don't mean that to be gratuitous or political. I'm just nervous about. I'm actually what I'm really nervous about as a social democrat is the capacity of the bureaucracies to actually deliver. I'm really
Mm.
nervous about that. So as someone who believes that government can play a positive and constructive role and should play a positive and constructive role, I think we've lost a lot of capacity in the government because it's kind of ossified. It's kind of a bigger bureaucracy that is a check writing institution. And what we need is what we used to have in Canada and in other parts of the world is we need a proactive bureaucracy that's driving change, like structural change and difficult debates, right? Like if you're going to do like when we tried to do land use planning in British Columbia, we didn't just say what we're going to do and we didn't write checks. We engaged in an intense debate and trying to drive consensus in different areas. And where we didn't, we would make decisions. But I I just don't see that happening very much, especially from the federal government. It's just it's that old saying, if you look at 90% of the fisheries department staff of the federal government is in Ottawa. 90%. There's no fish in Ottawa. Like so
Mhm.
on the ground, do they, and the risk taking that you need to do if you're trying to build the country in the face of an existential threat, you need a new attitude to drive change. And you need bureaucrats who are prepared to take risks and be held accountable. And you need to demand a sense of urgency and act with integrity, but not to slow down and just take the low bid or spend 2 years developing the bid process, right? We need a
Mhm.
different kind of sense of urgency than I've seen in a long time. And that's what worries me.
A call for braver bureaucrats. All right. Glen, will you stay and come to the minibar with us?
Sure.
All right.
I think you asked two questions. I spent the whole time answering them.
Nah, it was great. It was great. We know. We invited you back. We knew what we were in for.
Well, it's not the first time you ignored a script I wrote, Glenn.
It's true, Jeff.
All right. I'll have Geoff kick us off this week actually with the minibar.
Very, very quickly, raising a glass to Aaron Shumahatsa. He's known to many people as Aaron Sam. He just announced last week he's going to not offer himself up again this fall to be president of the Democratic Party in BC. He did that since 2021. Did an excellent job. He's got a very good and illustrious career in legal justice circles. He was chief for a number of years of the Lower Nicola Indian Band. Really terrific person. I enjoyed working with him, and I wish him all the best in what he's going to do next. I see that Aman Singh, who was the recently defeated but very capable MLA for Richmond Queensborough, says he wants to stand for that position. So that's good news too. So that's my double toast.
All right. Mike.
Preemptive raising of the glass to Ministry of Finance public servants who would be preparing the quarterly report for September. And I feel like this is going to be one of the more important quarterly reports we've seen in a long time because of the evolving nature of the economy and hopefully some of the forecasts that are circulating out there about how bad the deficit's going to be are wrong. But one thing we can trust, I think, is the dispassionate analysis that goes into the Ministry of Finance's budgets and quarterly reports. So I think we get the straight goods, and I think we're lucky to have the professionalism that has historically been there with the Ministry of Finance. So we'll see in September.
All right. Glenn.
Oh, put me on the spot. Mike, I think I'll raise a glass to your leader, John Rustad. I assume you're a conservative now.
I'm actually a podcaster, Glenn.
Well, you voted. I'm sure you voted.
I
for
am
the
a BC Liberal, is what I am.
Which means you
Still,
voted for the Conservative Party, Mike.
I am
Let's
the
be
secret
honest.
ballot,
Or
Glenn.
the Conservative Party, or as I like to call it, the pro-measles party.
Oh, is that what they are?
The John, I'm going to raise a glass to John Rustad.
I'm glad the old Glenn finally showed up here.
I
in this
know,
area.
yeah, you
Jeez,
brought
I was
it.
getting worried. Like
You
I'm
brought it.
soft.
I'm going to raise a glass to John Rustad, who's in the middle of a leadership review. I think he's going to win. These
Mhm.
people tell me he is.
Mhm.
And it's an interesting challenge. He has the same challenge that I think that Jason Kenney had in Alberta. He's got a fringe group, which is not insignificant in British Columbia, and I think, unfortunately, from my view, growing, sort of an anti-science, anti-vax group, which is maybe it's 10% of the population of British Columbia, something like that. And that's a real important part of his support. And then he's got a business community, which is traditionally conservative and doesn't like the provincial NDP. And getting that balance, is hard. It's a bit of a Frankenstein's monster. If he appeals to the fringe group, then he loses the election. If he appeals to the business community too much, then he loses that fringe group, which is an important part of his coalition. And he's, kicked a few people out. He's probably got some more he should kick out, but he's trying to navigate that balance. And it sounds to me from people I know that he's going to hang on. And I think that's to his credit.
Mhm. Yeah, no small thing. I
With
agree.
the way you described it, Glenn, it sounds almost as perilous as the NDP coalition.
Oh,
Well, all parties are a coalition, but I think Mike, to be fair, I mean, you're right. They're all parties of coalition. All
Yeah.
parties have strains. This one is particularly challenging for the federal conservatives, I think, provincial conservatives in BC and Alberta, where they have not an insignificant fringe, which is really outside historically the mainstream, but it's an important part of that coalition that they need. And I'm hoping John survives because then, the NDP will win again.
Mhm. Mhm. All right, good one. Good one,
Famous
Glenn.
last words.
Yeah,
So we'll see.
we'll see. Okay, and I'll wrap us up with a toast. I'd actually like to toast. Some folks might have seen the news this week, actually, that my boss, Kevin McCourt, CEO of the Vancouver Foundation, is stepping down. He does that after 12 years as at the head of the foundation and having given away about $1 billion to people in BC over that time. Actually, probably a little more than that. One of the interesting things about Kevin is that he came in and had a really a brave articulation of what philanthropy can be. And it relates to our work because he really saw that the foundation could lean into funding kind of policy research and advocacy. And we've talked before on this pod about how BC is kind of this policy incubator. And I think some of those seeds and some of that incubation has its roots back in the foundation, thanks to Kevin and his work. It's been a pleasure working for him. I think he should be really proud of his record. And I want to raise my glass to him and wish him all the best in whatever he does next.
Hear, hear.
Here.
Thank you. All right. So thanks for joining us again, Glenn. It's always great to have you. Always a ride. I'll fasten my seatbelt next time. It's great having you. And I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS. I want to thank Fortis BC. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.